now move straight into our second panel discussion of the day. This second panel will reflect on the question of how the business world can embrace a long-term perspective in its decision-making. I would like to welcome now to the stage the panellists and hand the floor to my colleague, Dr. Aideen O'Doherty, who is going to moderate the session and is an assistant professor in the School of Business here in DCU.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dermot, for the introduction and for, running this whole thing today, because it's been fantastic so far. So, as Dermot said, my name is Aideen O'Doherty. I'm an assistant prof just over in the business school there, and my area is sustainability accounting. And I'm delighted to be moderating the business panel because this question that we have, so how can the business world embrace long-term perspectives in its decision-making? Business is all about short term. We all know that. It's all about profits. It's all about quarterly returns. And as we've been listening today, I can't help but think, if we had one of the members of the Children's and Young Persons Assembly on Biodiversity, if we had, people from the Global South represented on every board in every business, what would they make of the way businesses are run today? And I suppose, what does a business world look like where those perspectives are platformed and taken into account? So like I said, I'm really glad we're exploring this. We have four great speakers, so Bernadette, Sriteja, Aoife and Karen, and I will introduce them all in due course. So like the other panel this morning, what we'll do is we'll have a short opening contribution from each speaker, 3 to 5 minutes. Then I will ask each speaker a question, and again, we'll have brief answers to that. And then we'll throw it out for audience questions. And I'd absolutely encourage, anyone who hasn't asked a question today, who's been sort of waiting for the right moment to ask a question, please do. This is your time to put up your hands and ask questions. And looking forward to hearing from plenty of people in the audience. Okay, so I want to introduce our first speaker, who is this wonderful lady on my right, my former boss. So, she has great taste. Our first speaker is Bernadette Phelan. So Bernadette is Head of Advisory Services at Business in the Community Ireland. She has over 20 years' experience in sustainability, working with leading global businesses. Currently, she is on the management team of Business in the Community, which is a business network for sustainability. Bernadette leads on strategy, engagement and advisory services to over 120 global and Indigenous companies. She's responsible for the CEO-led Leaders Group on Sustainability, including the BITC Low Carbon Pledge. So welcome to Bernadette.
Very much. Just into the glamour of the stage lights. In terms of the question that was posed, for me, it was optimistically framed because it's a how question, as opposed to why does business need to think long term? Because I do think that why question, while it's still debated in immature companies, sustainability is mainstreamed within business, and there's an understanding that we need to execute at speed, as we've heard earlier. So for me, there's an optimism already in the framing. What I thought would be useful in terms of kickstarting this discussion, because I really want to hear the questions and the other contributors on the panel. But within our work, I think within this question of how, we're currently focused on what we would see as 3 key accelerators of change. And they would be the leadership mindset, reimagining what business value actually is, and transparency and radical transparency to have new models of stakeholder engagement. So I'll just comment briefly on each of those 3, because I know there's probably PhDs and master projects happening in terms of each of them. They're very dense, but I suppose I'll endeavour to take what is a conceptual piece and show how it actually is made manifest and real within the daily work that we do within business and the community. So in terms of the leadership piece, and again, really echoed from the contributors this morning, we know from our lived experience, we're around 25 years, that where you have leadership that's inclusive, that's collaborative, that's where you see sustainability coming onto the agenda, both at senior team and board level. So we keep that as kind of our basic tenets of what good leadership looks like within this space. And again, for that to happen, you're talking about the skills of listening, vulnerability, humility. You know, you pick up a leadership management book from 20 years ago, that is not the characterization of a strong business leader. So the role models that we need are going to be quite different, I think. And I suppose what that means for us at a practical level within our work is, firstly, we run what we call a leaders group. So it's a gathering of CEOs under Chatham House rules where they can share their own experiences. So peer-to-peer of that honest question of what's working for you, what's not working for you, how did you do that problem, and really honest learning and sharing. We also will have a report out at the end of the month that we've done in partnership with Maynooth University and with SkillsNet, and we worked with 5 leadership teams from companies within our members. And again, it was, and my colleague Marion Curry in the audience led on this project, but it was to take frameworks like the EU competency framework and to go, well, what specifically are the skills, mindsets, beliefs of a future fit senior team, and to help current senior teams within these 5 companies to understand their current state and have an exploration around their future state and where they want to get to. And when we look at the findings of that, it's really interesting because, again, this is where you're talking about the link from primary school to secondary to tertiary education. You know, people are struggling with the imagined future. You know, futures literacy, critical systems thinking. You know, we are drilled, I think, in terms of knowing our own discipline, knowing one, you know, I'm an accountant, that's my framing, that's my view on the world, that's the solution I bring. And I think all of us hold that within our discipline, where being multidisciplinary, being very much open to different contexts are increasingly important. So that's a really important project for us to actually make real what does a really good senior team of the future look like, and ones that can actually build a business model from an imagined future, not from an historical past that isn't fit for purpose. The second area that we try to really support our companies in is this reimagining business value. And this is where the non-financial metrics of social and environment are put on an even footing and even gravitas with financials. And that's the whole thrust of the EU reporting directives that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, the whole thrust of a lot of the reporting mandates that are coming out of the European Union. And within that, it's so progressive to have them. Metrics matter, but they also need to be the right metrics. And that's a large part of what we would discuss with our companies as well. What are the right proxies? Because it's back to, you know, statistics and damned lies and phrases like that. So the other part of what we would see is helping companies to reimagine, you know, a business model that captures true value, true cost, is about management systems. And 2 of the companies on the stage are our members, and we would have worked with them on a certification that we have, the Business Working Responsibly mark. It's modelled on an ISO. But this management systems has actually really helped companies who are doing a lot of operational pieces of work to bring that disparate work together, to put it into a strategic framework, to bring it into the core of the business, to help understand where sustainability sits within the strategy, the structures, and the culture of the business. And that's kind of a key part of our daily work as well. And then the third piece, and for me, it very much relates to the overarching theme of this conference, is that radical transparency. And for me, it's radical transparency to actually reimagine stakeholder relationships within business and what they look like. And I think that kind of speaks to changing power dynamics and a whole raft of different pieces. Because, you know, in the business models of the future, you'll have energy companies that aren't selling energy, they're selling energy efficiency. You'll have people that aren't selling their washing machine, they're leasing it, they're leasing their car. So, you know, the business models will look really different. One of the areas of high interest for our members at the moment is very much supplier engagement models. And I know our other panellists will contribute very much to this debate, but like we know Scope 3 is within your supply chain, so getting metrics from your suppliers. Human rights issues is a supply chain piece. So our members are really looking at their current supplier engagement models and questioning whether they're fit for purpose. And in essence, they know they're not. The lines have to be redrawn. And I think that's a very top of mind critical issue at the moment, both in terms of the decarbonisation agenda, but also in terms of global supply chains and fairness and justice within those global supply chains. So that's a very quick overview of a lot of topics, but I hope I've served to articulate how lofty concepts are in the work that we're doing. We're really endeavouring to anchor them into something concrete. And I suppose to close, really, and again back to that stakeholder engagement piece, this is where the fact that there will be trade-offs, that this transition is going to be difficult. We just have to be brave and bold in our leadership stance to recognise that and design interventions to manage those that are most affected. But I do think we just need more of what we're currently doing, and we just need to move faster. So the role of educators and addressing those skills gap and the mindset shifts is just really fundamental to answering the question. So.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Bernadette. Great. So our next speaker is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Sriteja Reddy Wudaru. So Sriteja is an assistant professor in sustainable innovation, here at DCU Business School. His research interests lie at the intersection of organisations, society and individuals. He holds a PhD in management from Luis Guido Carli University in Italy. And most important of all, Sriteja is a writer and a poet. So he has published 2 books and can often be found performing at open mics across Ireland. So he's going to be more comfortable than any of us here today. Thanks, Sriteja.
Thanks, Aideen, and my fellow panelists and guests. I have to start by apologizing because I'm struggling with dry cough. So I'll be disrupting this panel a lot today. So I'm sorry for that before we start. So how can businesses adopt a long-term perspective? And in line with the conference, I'm kind of taking this very literally, like how can they adopt long-term perspective to achieving sustainability? And the conventional view says that if businesses really chase profits, they should achieve sustainability naturally, because you are creating products that are of high quality, which means they're going to be used by your customers longer and your customers are going to be happy. You don't have to exploit resources to replace them as quickly. If you want efficient business practices, you have to have kind of loyal, committed employees, so you pay them well. So the conventional view says that you naturally tend to be sustainable if you chase profits. Unfortunately, we are in a world where that's not really true. We are seeing fashion companies that are making clothing that's deteriorating quite frequently. They are manipulating customers through buyback schemes to drive them to buy more and more. We are seeing food companies using fertilizers, pesticides to increase yield in shorter time. So we are seeing companies that are really resorting deliberately to unsustainable practices in order to maximize their profits. So I would say that actually businesses are currently poorly designed to achieve sustainability or even take this long-term perspective towards achieving or pursuing intergenerational justice. That being said, can't businesses be sustainable? Yes, I would say, because this long-term perspective isn't some idealistic fantasy, and it's actually a matter of survival for organizations, right? It's quite simple. You would not be relevant anymore if you become sustainable, or if you don't embrace sustainability. But today I want to talk or steer the conversation a little bit towards social issues, because we tend to talk about climate, we tend to talk about environment, and that's what we're probably doing a lot during the conference today, because that's much more tangible, right? It's much more measurable. It's the effects of environmental or global climate change is easily visible. So we tend to focus our efforts, our discussions, our conversations towards environment and ignore a lot of social issues that actually come with climate change. So talking about carbon footprint reduction, talking about renewable energy sources, talking about Scope 3 emissions across supply chains is much more comfortable than talking about menstrual equity or maternity leave, or talking about opportunities for the marginalized populations, talking about child labor or modern slavery across supply chains. So that's what I want to shed light on a little bit today by urging you to think about the social issues that come with climate change. Even if you look at the definition of climate justice, it reflects the fact that climate change has disproportionate impacts on marginalized populations. That's what it is, right? But what can businesses do in this grand scheme of things? First of all, of course, they should start by recognizing that they have to go beyond the boundaries, their organizational boundaries of their business activities, and start looking at the challenges that they can address, not just new product development, not just maximization of their profits. For example, we are holding a lot of companies responsible for any human rights violations that occur across their supply chains. So it is imperative that organizations start paying attention to these kinds of issues surrounding child labor, surrounding modern slavery, irrespective of where it occurs across its supply chains. They need to future-proof their supply chains in other ways if they want to avoid this criticism, these scandals, and so on. And they can also start by collaborating with other non-profits, institutions, governments. And I'm not talking about collaborations through just charities or some trust funds. It's really like strategic alliances and joint ventures where they work with these other entities to develop solutions that would mitigate climate change, mitigate social issues, just the way they would traditionally do for new product development, would do for things that are valuable for their shareholders, but now the same, because that says that they have these capabilities and skills. So it's time they really use them to address the wider environmental and social issues. And because we as customers are also demanding a lot of transparency, maybe we need something like Scope 3 and Scope 4, but on more social side, and that is disappointingly very much missing. Unless businesses really embrace sustainability, like I said, they would not be relevant anymore in the future. And it's a high time businesses really embrace this meaningful change, because change without commitment, change without genuinity is really not meaningful anymore. Thank you.
Fantastic, Sriteja. Thanks so much. So our next speaker is Aoife Connaughton. She's a director of Deloitte's Climate and Sustainability Practice. I've never heard of Deloitte personally, but anyway, here we are. She works with Deloitte clients and their stakeholders to help them implement strategies to understand their climate risks and reach their sustainability objectives. Prior to joining Deloitte, Aoife was executive director of 2 Degrees. She has a qualification in supply chain sustainability management from Cambridge University, which is almost as good as DCU. And she is an Antashka Climate Ambassador. So welcome, Aoife.
Thanks, Aideen. And I suppose I just wanted to start by touching on something Ella mentioned earlier. So she's talking about, systems change and transformation, and I think that's why we're all here today. And, corporates and organisations are really one part of that bigger system, that bigger change that obviously needs to evolve over time. And all of us, I suppose, work at different levers of different levels of working within those systems. And I suppose that's part of what all of our roles are, to work out where can we have the biggest impact, how can we help these organisations change and evolve to meet the new challenges that we're facing. And I suppose, from the outside you think, corporations, they're going to be really, really good at long-term thinking. They're going to have that nailed. They spend a lot of time looking at their, doing horizon scanning, understanding the trends, looking at what comes of them. But as I started my career in corporate strategy, and a lot of corporate strategies, they're kind of 5 to 10 years max, with the exception probably of utilities that tend to be have a longer-term time horizon. And organisations work in this sort of market where often they have shareholders. Shareholders demand information from them all the time. So organisations have this sort of quarterly reporting. Back in 2018, we saw Unilever make this really kind of bold move where they said, we're actually not going to give you quarterly information anymore. It's driving knee-jerk reactions. It's driving short-term thinking. There's actually really good data out there that says organisations that report annually and give less information to their shareholders tend to have higher capex, so higher levels of investment. So it's a really sort of interesting kind of interplay, but at the same time we're also seeing value in huge amounts of transparency and giving that information, and organisations working with stakeholders. So I think the stakeholder perspective is much more important than the shareholder perspective when we look at this. So I say Deloitte's a very big organisation. We work with lots of companies globally. We surveyed 2,000 CXOs, so CEOs and their friends on the C-suite, to ask them what do they think about climate change. How are they addressing these sort of challenges? And I think the findings are really interesting, kind of on a number of levels. As you'd expect, they say climate change is the top 3 issue. So, and we see that ourselves in our work. Anytime we speak to a board, they always want to talk to us about climate change and broader sustainability issues. So they really, really get it's a big issue, and they should get it, because it's off the top 10 WF global risks, climate change or environmental risks are kind of 7 of the top 10. So they get that it's a big issue. They're very optimistic, which probably raised a few eyebrows. So they feel, 84% of them feel that they're going to be able to meet their kind of sustainable growth targets whilst also addressing climate change. So that's quite a kind of surprising statistic. But what we also find is they feel that they're starting to act on climate change. But when we ask them what sort of actions are they doing, as you might expect, they've yet to kind of really lean into kind of the big things that are moving the dial, and they're focusing maybe more on kind of the short-term things, the lower-hanging fruit. And to be fair, they're doing it at a time where they're kind of increasing their own organisational capability, so they're focusing on things like energy efficiency, training, they're starting to look at things like kind of, the materials in their products and those sort of pieces. But the bigger things around, the bigger things that really move the dial, so really got sustainable procurement, looking at their kind of scope 3, really addressing some of those challenges, business model innovation, but also looking at their activities such as lobbying, are tending to come a bit later. So they're starting to look at them, but they've yet to take kind of the bold moves that they know they need to take in those areas. And then when we say to them, so they're saying that they feel quite positive, but they actually say the private sector as a whole, only about 30% of they feel that only 30% of the private sector are taking it as seriously as it needs to be taken. So there's kind of a bit of a disparity there in what we hear. And I suppose, I often think of this quote from Frederick Jameson that says, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I think that the challenge for organisations is, while they need to think long term, they're struggling to fully understand exactly how to transform and what they need to do. There are those trade-offs, as Bernadette mentioned, really, really significant trade-offs, and obviously as time goes by, those trade-offs become bigger. So we think, well, what can organisations do about it? I think there's probably 3 things that I wanted to focus on. The first being that piece, and Bernadette mentioned it also, is really about innovation. So there's a real need to look at kind of, increasingly radical innovation around business models, around how organisations create value, how they engage with their stakeholders, how they operate in this sort of new world. And again, this is where there's opportunities to bring in kind of the sort of thinking, like the sort of the models, like as we mentioned, kind of, the donut economics, other models of actually looking at kind of, value creation and what's happening around there. I think there is some kind of worrying stats out there. There's a really interesting paper from Nature last year where they looked at 25 million different papers, and they found that actually the rate of kind of innovation was declining over time. So actually kind of the level of kind of radical thinking and disruption was decreasing. So I think that's a real concern, but actually that's something that businesses are really good at. They reinvent themselves all the time, and this is the opportunity of a lifetime for reinvention. I think the second point is really looking around governance, and I know Darren mentioned it earlier. and like there really are some very, very good models and to move towards around trying to bring in that longer term thinking in boards. And obviously it's something that Ella mentioned also, our semi-states already have worker representatives on their boards, and I've worked with a lot of those organisations, and you see a huge value from that diversity on the board. It brings a different perspective. There's a really interesting model. So House of Hackney in the UK, they're the first organisation to have both the kind of the voice of future generations and of nature on the board. And if you look at kind of natureforboards.com, I think it has a list of organisations that are starting to bring in those kind of mechanisms, specific kind of governance mechanisms to bring in the voice of nature on the board. And I think that is going to be incredibly important, because this is what we see is it's that diversity of thought and innovation go hand in hand. And obviously, while we see huge positive signs of it coming bottom up and outside in, it also needs to come top down. But I think that the third area where I do feel genuine hope is actually the kind of the very unsexy area of regulatory agenda. So CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the Deforestation Directive, there are directives coming hot and fast in a way that someone who's worked in sustainability for 15 years, it's like we're like the dog that caught the car. We can't believe that it's finally caught up with where we wanted it to be. And genuinely, like while you would love organisations to be kind of following the trailblazers of Unilever's and Patagonia's, the regulatory agenda, so I suppose the stick more than the carrot, is really genuinely forcing change. So it's making them look at that kind of affected stakeholder viewpoint. It literally forces them to decide to look at this kind of what we call kind of this double materiality. So what impacts are organisations having on wider society and stakeholders, but also how is kind of wider society and the changes that we're facing going to impact them. So suddenly, if you have an organisation where they're having to, from a regulatory point of view, do climate scenario analysis and actually go, what's our organisation, what's our profit model, what's our business model look like in a 1.5 degree world of warming, that actually has a transformative effect. And I really, really can't overstate how welcome it is. Organisations are suddenly have to do kind of climate transition planning. So this is like 30-year strategies. So this is something that's very different. They're having to say, well, actually, what stranded assets might we have in this 1.5 degree scenario? What actual trade-offs do we need to face? How are we going to spend our money? How are we going to evolve our business model? How are we going to evolve our governance, our structure, our people? And having to actually put that on paper, disclose it, be compared to your peers is really, really radical and transformative. And all of the large organisations in Ireland are having to do that now. They're starting to report on it from next year. So I think it's really, really welcome. And I think it really does drive forward that longer term thinking that's so desperately needed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aoife. So our final speaker is Karen Doyle. So Karen is Head of Business Development at Gas Networks Ireland. She has responsibility for the development of renewable gas, and she has worked in the energy sector for 20 years. She was previously Head of Energy and Infrastructure at Ulster Bank. She has also lectured on sustainable energy finance at DCU and was a board member of Wind Energy Ireland. And she holds an MBS in Financial Services from UCD Smurfit Business School. So welcome, Karen.
Thanks a million, Aideen. It's actually really lovely to be back. I have lots of flashbacks of the sustainable finance course that I think DCU had a lot of foresight back 10, 12 years ago when they decided actually this is a really important topic to discuss. So it's really lovely to be back here today. So I'm Head of Business Development at Gas Networks Ireland. For those of you maybe who don't know what we do, we are a semi-state utility. We're fully owned by the state. We have 14,000 kilometres of network under the ground. We're the TSO and the DSO, so we're the transmission operator, which is like the highway for the gas network, and the distribution network operator. We don't buy or sell gas. We don't engage with end user customers. So we're not Shell or BP, or we're not Bord Gáis or Flow Gas. We simply transport the gas. For us, we definitely think in very long-term horizons. And one of the reasons I joined the organisation 2 years ago was because there is a drive to actually shift all that fossil gas out of our network and replace it with more sustainable and indigenously sourced gases like biomethane and hydrogen. So I think there's probably a lot of disappointed energy in the room, I would say today, thinking Ireland is really far behind, and absolutely we have a lot to do. But I think if we look at our renewable electricity market, we are world leading in terms of what our transmission operator EirGrid have done on our network, the amount of renewables that are on, the amount of sort of brown electricity that's been kind of pushed off our network. We are world leading, and other countries are looking to us to see what technologies have we used and how have we done that. So I suppose I'm quite optimistic that from an energy perspective, we have a lot of state actors, but we actually also have a lot of commercial actors who are actually seeing the opportunity. They're actively developing projects. We had the first offshore wind project in Europe. Unfortunately, we didn't follow up, but we are world leading in some of the things that we're doing. So I do think we need to sort of remember that as well, Aideen. So that's part of the reason, I suppose, I did move to gas networks, because gas is at a point where maybe electricity was 15 years ago. We're about 40% of the primary energy needs of the country. Electricity is probably around 10%. So we've made really good strides in electricity, but we haven't made those strides in both oil and gas, and we absolutely need to be sustainable. So what we're doing is we have a plan, I suppose, out to 2050, where we are trying to get to a net zero position. And that involves us, I suppose, working with all of our stakeholders, with the people who use our transport pipes, encouraging them to actually diversify into the more renewable gases, but also the end customer. And I think this is probably another point that we do need to remember, that as consumers, whether that's ourselves in the audience, whether it's corporates, we actually have a lot of power in terms of decisions that we make, and that will drive what companies are actually delivering to us. So we're using that power in terms of getting those customers to sort of understand their options around sustainability. So we're out speaking to our large users, saying, like, what is your transition plan? What are you doing? How much renewable electricity can you transition to? What are you doing around the residual gas or oil needs that you have? Are you engaging with renewable technologies? So we're actively working on that side. And we're working with policymakers as well in terms of actually setting policy for things like hydrogen, for things like biomethane. We're working with government on the Climate Action Plan. And we're really trying to drive from that position as well to sort of set those targets out. Biomethane is probably our short-term sort of renewable gas. And for those of you who don't know what biomethane is, it's a carbon-neutral gas. Can be actually carbon negative with some additional processes, but it basically takes, like, our food waste, our farm wastes, anything organic that is waste. It takes the methane off that, it cleans it up. It can be used as a direct substitute for anything that we use natural gas for at the moment. So it's a really circular product. And for us, it's really important because actually it allows communities sort of engage in the transition. So particularly for rural Ireland, who are under like immense pressure in terms of the agricultural targets and everything else, this is a really good opportunity for them to be able to participate, to reduce that carbon impact of what they're doing, to create, and it's not a bad thing, to create revenues in communities either. So allowing jobs, allowing money to stay in those communities and avoid us having to actually import that gas from abroad. We're also working with government and stakeholders on hydrogen. So at the moment, we've been really, really successful as a nation in terms of our renewable electricity that we generate. You might have seen last week that EirGrid have announced that actually they've been able to increase the level of penetration of renewables on the system at any one time. So they can get up to about 80% now. But there's a lot of time when we actually oversupply the level of electricity that we need. And we will be building a lot more, and hydrogen is a really nice solution for actually dealing with some of that waste electricity product. For anybody who's kind of interested in seeing more about this, Energy Cloud are a really interesting kind of charity organisation who are currently working with the wind developers and industry around taking that excess during the night when it would be just literally dumped off the system because it can't technically be used. They're actually diverting that into hot water tanks in social housing homes. People who may not be able to afford to actually heat that water overnight. And that's a free service they're providing to allow that excess to be used. So we need to look at ways of using our waste electricity. This is a really nice way with Energy Cloud, and actually converting that in the longer term to hydrogen, which can be used in certain circumstances where it's got value. So at the very top of the sort of value chain, where it actually will be used in hard to abate sectors, which don't maybe have transition options. So I suppose the message from us is we are really very much trying to progress on a transition to green gases to allow our customers to decarbonise. It is going to be a really challenging journey. But for us, it's a really important journey, and so we're trying to bring all of our stakeholders and customers on that with us, Aideen.
Okay, great. Thanks a million, Karen. And thank you all so much, or thank you to all of our speakers. You were all brilliant, but you were spectacularly over time, all of you. I was hoping by the end we might get one person who's within time, but no. You were all brilliant, so that's great. And it was fantastic to hear what you had to say. So I'm going to go straight into audience questions, and then if we run out of audience questions, we'll come back and I will ask you some questions. So let's see. I'm going to prioritise people who we haven't seen speaking today. There's one up. We'll start up in the balcony there.
Hi.
Just about.
I have a question for the speakers from DCU. I think I agree very much with what you say. I suppose, though, but I know that there are companies internationally that are doing great work in the value chain, like all the food ingredients in the Netherlands, doing a lot of very interesting work in West Africa. But this country here, we're built on SMEs. We're built on medium-sized companies who don't have the expertise. So I suppose the question is, to you, because you're in education, how can we educate the companies and help the companies get to the places that some of the big, large international corporates are at or are striving to?
Excellent question. I might just take another one up on the balcony, and then we'll get some comments from the panel. There's a question up there. Yep. Go ahead.
Hi. You can hear me well. Thanks. My question is for Karen in Gas Networks Ireland. Thanks to the panel. You all spoke great. I'm really interested in you talking about biomethane and your goals to get to net zero with that. A couple of things you said about biomethane being carbon neutral. That's just with the use of it rather than including the transport and production of it, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're taking the whole life of it into account, I don't think it is carbon neutral, but I'd be very happy to be corrected on that. And interestingly, then you said some processes can make it carbon negative. So if you could expand on that, that would be great. Further to some of the phrases you used, and again, please correct me, I don't want to be difficult here, I just want to have things clear. It's really important that, especially in talks like this, that we use phrases correctly. So you called biomethane circular. How is that possible when once it's used, it's gone?
Okay, so a couple of points on biomethane there. So I think we'll take some responses from the panel. So specific questions for Sriteja and Karen. Sriteja, we might go with you first. It was SMEs and education.
Thank you for a really interesting question. And actually, we were having this conversation at a different event on Friday where we had a representative from the Wheel involved. And as some of you might know, the Wheel is an Irish body that works with social enterprises, charities, and organizations like that from Ireland. And what we were discussing was, actually, it's nice that Ireland is built on a lot of SMEs, some of which are these social enterprises as well, because they are uniquely positioned to deliver value that larger corporations often miss out on, because SMEs, of which most are family businesses, most are social enterprises, they really put emphasis on employees as family members. So unlike large traditional organizations, corporations, they invest a lot into employee development, growth, training and things like that. I'm not saying invest a lot of money, but they are more committed and genuinely interested in growing together with their employees. But the problem is, as far as I understood, and I would have to check, but as far as I understood talking to this person from the Wheel, is that a lot of social enterprises in Ireland cannot access SkillNet because of the way they are registered, and they cannot access a lot of funding that actual larger organizations can use to train their employees and things like that. So maybe that is something we need to work on, where irrespective of whether they are social enterprises, family businesses, SMEs, what kind of educational opportunities can we offer those organizations and the employees there? I don't know if I answered the question a bit.
No, that was great from my perspective, Sriteja. And yeah, Karen, we'll come to you on the biomethane.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So in terms of the biomethane is certified here in Ireland, right, and in Europe, and the whole process end to end is actually reviewed. So transport, the types of material that are being used, how it's getting to the customer, down to what type of vehicle, that's all actually assessed in terms of the assessment, and in terms of those customers then being eligible, I suppose, to call that gas biomethane, and for it to be eligible for a green certificate in Ireland, which we manage. So that process is really tightly managed, and it focuses the producer to actually look at the full end-to-end, not just what's going on in the sort of biomethane reactor, but how it's getting from the farm, how it's getting to the end user customer. So the RED 3 directives will focus even more on that in terms of making sure that actually the source is sustainable, because I think as consumers we do look to labels, and we want to make sure that actually we don't have to do too much digging behind that. If it has a certification, we want to be able to I suppose believe that. In terms of the other uses, are the potential being carbon negative, Denmark is probably at the forefront in terms of innovation and work in terms of this particular product. And we're just back from a sort of a policymaker field trip there last week. They're at about 40% of their natural or their gas system is actually biomethane at the moment, 100% at some times during the year. They had targeted to get to 100% by about, I think, 2030, 2032, but they've accelerated that, and they expect to get there by 2028. There's a company called Nature Energy there that are doing a lot of innovation work, particularly using green hydrogen in the processes. So if they can add green hydrogen into the process of the biomethane being produced, that actually can couple with the CO2 that's in the process and actually makes a higher percentage of biomethane. And that's where the negative carbon piece is coming from. They're looking at every single part of the process to see how can we extract more out of that process. So how can we make, firstly, more biomethane? How can we make better quality digestate fertilizer, which can be spread directly onto the land, so that displaces sort of chemical fertilizers that are coming from parts of the world that we probably don't want to be importing them from. Any CO2 that's left, they're upgrading that to be able to be used in things like food processes, to keep fruit and vegetables fresh longer. So they're using every part of the mix, I suppose, and that's why we would call it circular, because actually it's taking a waste product and taking every single element of value out of that waste process, and actually then putting what's left back into the ground and actually allowing farmers to sort of displace that carbon fertilizer. So I suppose that's why we would say it is a circular type product.
Great, thanks, Karen. And just to clarify, is that something that's planned in Ireland?
In which part of it?
Were you talking about Denmark?
The technologies. I mean, like Nature Energy is a very large company in Denmark who was actually acquired by, I think, Shell about 18 months ago, because they wanted to transition. They wanted to transition what they're selling. They're also then involved in terms of, like, Ryanair have have entered a contract with them in terms of sustainable aviation fuel. So that biomethane is being used for sustainable aviation fuel, again, to displace...
Okay. Oh no, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Thank you
I
very
think,
much for answering.
Yeah, we would expect to see some of that in Ireland in terms of those technologies, and in terms of using that waste product, whether it's farm waste, whether it's your brown bin waste, so it's to avoid going to landfill.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's perfect, and thank you for answering so comprehensively. So I have 3 questions lined up the front, which I'm going to take. First, and we'll take them all together, and then we'll have a round of those. So I believe there's one here, and then we'll have there, and was there one in the front here? Yeah. Oh no, sorry, there was a. Yep, work away.
Supplementary question for Karen Doyle on renewable gas. Twice in your initial presentation, you referred to your gas as renewable. When I asked Gas Networks Ireland 2.5 years ago, September 2021, what percentage of the gas in its pipelines was actually biomethane, the answer was 0.003%. In other words, 99.997% is natural gas, a fossil fuel, not renewable. So what's the percentage now, and at what point are you justified in calling it renewable gas?
So to be clear,
sorry, I might just take the other 2 questions. Sorry, Karen, but we'll give you a little break first before you have to answer. Okay, so the question on biomethane, that's perfect, and then there was one over here, wasn't there?
Hi. Thank you very much for a great panel. I'm Susan Rosney, and I'm doing an MSc here in climate science, and it's fantastic, media policy and society. My question actually is for Aoife and maybe all the members of the panel. Are you concerned with the watering down of the CSRD and the CSDDD? Because it is a very encouraging move that we have this regulation now, but the watering down of those 2 in particular has been identified as a cause for concern.
Okay, so CSRD, that's great. Sorry, I was actually trying to get the mic to this man in the front side, but we'll get to your question as well. There's a mic coming now. Just wait for the mic. Yeah, thanks.
Intuitively, one would feel that at a global level, one needs to set targets of something like 0 growth and 0 inflation. And then, from a point of view of climate change and fuels and species extinction, one would feel that coal is really the most polluting, widely used fuel, in that it puts out particulate matter as well as carbon dioxide and other noxious gases. And maybe, as was mentioned, people like Shell and the big oil companies could be worked with to eliminate the use of coal around the world in some way or other. China and India and even the United States and Indonesia, I think, are very big users of coal, and maybe in some way they could be, the provision of oil and gas to them could be subsidized by the rest of the world. And then once we got rid of coal, even in money point, and for where it's used for making electricity, then we could move to getting rid of the use of diesel, which is puts out carcinogenic. Sorry,
you could frame that as a question.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect, yeah.
Now, how can the business world embrace these kind of what seem to be maybe they're simple thoughts, but that's what occurs to me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we have 3 questions. I think we might take the CSRD regulation question first. Actually, Aoife, do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Susan. Like, absolutely, as a sustainability person, as a human, we want the regulation to be as robust and as onerous, as possible to meet the objectives. And I suppose as a reminder, like CSRD is one of kind of the pillar regulations that's come out of the EU Green Deal, which is all about, transforming the European economy. I think CSRD has been, slightly watered down, really, in want of a better word. But to be fair, I think what it's been, it's really been more focused on kind of phase-in. So just as an example of just how onerous the regulation is. So organisations are reporting from January next year, depending on the reporting cycle. There's 1,144 different data points that they're going to be reporting on, depending on their different materiality. They're reporting on it on the same level as they previously would have reported on their kind of audited financial statements. So they're going to be audited in the same way that financial data would have been done. So they're going to have kind of assurance-ready data. So it's a massive, massive challenge. It's really welcome. So the way they work out which data points they need to disclose on is based on this sort of double materiality assessment. So being really clear on actually what's important to themselves as an organisation from a sustainability point of view and what's important to their stakeholders. But ultimately, it is definitely a huge leap. And I suppose when we look at the challenges in actually meeting those regulatory deadlines, it is I'm fairly breakneck speed, to be brutally honest. I think it'll ratchet up over time, and I think having the mechanism there in place to ratchet that up is really welcome. Certainly the CSDDD, so the due diligence directive, so this is all about really kind of human rights and looking at organisations' value chains and looking at really implementing kind of much more robust due diligence around human rights issues in the supply chain. That was much more disappointing, I think, in terms of how it has been weakened kind of at the last minute. But again, I think starting from a very low basis point, this is still going to be a huge leap forward for organisations. And I think just in terms of the awareness, in terms of just the mechanisms and the structures that organisations are having to put in place. So, a lot of big PLCs don't even have human rights policies. So suddenly for them to have to say, we've assessed our human rights, we understand them, we've put in, a remedy against these human rights breaches is really, it's really, really welcome. And again, I think for me, it's about at least moving forward. It's like what Sinead was talking about, you don't get all of the policy wins, but those big step forwards, I think, are really, really, really important. And I think to this gentleman's point around the different kind of fuel mixes and energy movements, this is where this climate transition plans, which are part of this regulation, will start to address some of that. So climate transition plans are about working out, which are the big levers that organisations have to be able to kind of reach those kind of Paris-aligned objectives of kind of, up to 1.5 degrees of warming. And that means that they will then have to say, okay, well, if we're moving to fuel, what's the next, if we're using coal, how do we displace that with, other fuel sources? How do we decarbonise our businesses? So again, it's putting that kind of that granularity and focus that again probably hasn't existed up till now. So I don't know if anyone's been following the high drama and the Science-Based Targets Initiative over the last couple of weeks, but 2 weeks ago they've effectively removed 239 really, really big companies from their website because they've said to date the ambitions and targets that they haven't been long-term enough. So they haven't got enough detail behind those long-term transition plans, and they're kind of going back to them to look for more detail behind those plans. So I think it's a really welcome direction of travel. Nothing could be fast enough. None of us can go fast enough or far enough. But I think it's also fair to say from where organisations have been, really, like Bernadette and I worked together 10, 15 years ago, there's been a lull, and now suddenly there's this huge acceleration. So the skills piece is really important to mention. Organisations are having to build capability really, really fast, and it couldn't be more welcome, I would say.
Perfect. Thanks, Aoife. Bernadette, I might just get you to come in there as well, kind of speaking to both of those questions, just in terms of your work with clients, and then we'll come to
probably a perspective as well, because for us within business and the community where we have really good partnerships with our companies, it is about being we coach them and support them, but also we challenge them. But our theory of change is working from within. So probably one perspective about the regulation, again, we are disappointed, but to Aoife's point, it is a huge lift. Another perspective that we would bring is we're always talking about being beyond compliance as well, because the urgency and the scale of what we need to do is, yes, the regulation is a heavy lift, but hopefully once we're over this transition hump, we still have to keep going. So we're toning it down a bit at the moment, but I always frame it as a beyond compliance piece as well. And I would also come back to one of the strands within our conversation today. From a human perspective, I believe we're only going to get businesses to transition when they can look at it as it's about innovation, it's about the opportunity, it's about creating this great imagined future. I know that may sound Pollyanna, but risk and costs will only get you so far within how human beings work. So I think stick matters, but the carrot and the opportunity is really important as well. And again, to Aoife's point about the transition plans, the only thing I would add, and my colleague Aideen is here today as well, a lot of companies are really just starting to grapple on nature and nature-based solutions, as well as, you know, the deployment of renewable energies. It's looking at different ways of actually managing our infrastructure, and like engineering companies like Arup are really stepping into this space as well. So I couldn't leave the stage without actually naming the whole biodiversity piece that we heard earlier, and probably actually just to name it, Connor, for me, encapsulated what good stakeholder engagement is about. He actually said, you weren't just talking to me to get information out of me. I learned something and I changed my perspective. And I think both business, NGOs, government, when we sit at the table with each other, it's not a negotiation about who's getting what spoils. I think we genuinely have to come in the spirit of we have to change all our mindsets to kind of get the collaboration models that we need. I think every actor on the stage needs to give up a bit of their beliefs and do something differently as well.
Okay. Thanks, Bernadette. That's fantastic. Karen, I'll ask you to respond on the biomethane percentage, and then I'm going to take one quick round of questions after that.
Thanks a million. So we currently have 2 plants that are generating biomethane, one in Kildare and one in Donegal. Government have set a target, as you know, 18 months ago to get to 10% of biomethane by 2030. And we have done some work with industry to see, actually, look, is that even possible? Is there enough projects that are actually willing to build? So we did a study last year which showed actually there was potential for 26% of our gas to be produced from biomethane. So we have a number of those projects. We have 4 of them who've decided they're going ahead of government policy. They're not waiting for the Department of Agriculture and DEC's strategy that is due to be hopefully released later this month or early next month, that will set out how that renewable heat obligation scheme will work. So at a high level, utility companies that we buy our utilities from will be told you actually have to procure a percentage of your heat load from renewable sources. So that will actually drive a business case for a number of these projects. So 176 of them are getting themselves ready, going through planning, engaging with their communities and trying to get off the blocks. But the key for them, Philip, as you know, is they need policy, they need support in the same way the electricity market did. And until we see that happening, I think those projects, some will move forward because they're working directly with corporates who will give them that long-term price certainty. And the rest will need to wait until that sort of policy signal comes from government. So we don't, as I said, generate the gas ourselves. We just transport it. And at the moment, we have 2 plants. It is a small percentage, but it is growing. And we are really working hard with stakeholders and government to push to say we actually need to provide the conditions that that number can grow to the 10%.
Okay, great.
And what is the percent now? And should you be calling it renewable now?
So I misunderstood your question because I didn't say we were I said we have a strategy to get to net zero by 2050. We do have a small percentage.
In your presentation, you referred to it as renewable gas in the present tense. I've just looked at the GNI website. You refer to renewable gas in the present tense. So I'm asking you if the percentage in September of 2021 was 0.003. What is it now, and can it really honestly be defined as renewable? If it's an aspiration, great, but call it an aspiration.
Yeah, the aspiration is to get to net zero. As I say, there's 2 plants that are producing and they're selling, and actually one of those plants is going into the transport sector. So, through the RTFO scheme. So, as I said, 2 plants, there's 70 gigs going into the system. It is a small amount. We want to grow that, but we can't grow that without that government policy signal being in place.
Okay, no, thank you both for discussion. I think it's a number. Was it you were looking for a number? Was it? It was 2. It was a certain percentage.
It was 70 gigs translates to 0.003%.
I can come back to you with the exact numbers based on the 2023 numbers. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, no, thank you for the discussion. That was useful to have. So I'm going to take a couple of questions, and then we'll let Aniel come to your question this time in the middle there, and then we'll go for the question at the back as well. And do you know what? If there's only three, we'll get three in. There's one there as well. So I know, but I'm prioritising people who haven't spoken that much. So so we'll take the three questions, and then everyone on the panel, you can get, I'll give you sort of 1 minute to sort of give your thoughts on those questions, or just closing thoughts in general as well.
Hi.
So
I'm here. So my name is Manuel Salazar. I'm working for a big corporate, but I also give talks on corporate activism. And when I go to companies, I ask the employees what are willing to do actually to face their employer in terms of to reduce their emissions, and they are terrified. They are basically feel threats by trying to speak up about clients that their employer have, and is investing in fossil fuels. So they don't know where to draw the line, and they don't know how to basically stop that. So it happened to me as well. I needed to challenge publicly my employers not to be fired, basically. So in your opinion, probably it's a question for Bernadette, in the education part. So what the employees can do basically to do a proper challenge on the employer when they are not following their values and principles, right? So climate assessments don't exist. They are still dealing with clients that invest in fossil fuels. So where do you draw the line? So
Okay, perfect. So how can employees challenge their employers? Sorry, I have a countdown clock looking at me here. So I'm going to make sure the questions are brief. So there's the gentleman back there. Yep.
Hi, thank you so much to the panel for the discussion. And I just had one question for companies like semi-state companies like VHI that appoint or elect their CEOs for a shorter term, 3 to 5 years. How can these companies probably embrace a longer term perspective, especially from a sustainability lens?
Okay, thank you. That's perfect. And then I think there's a final question in the... Oh God, we've got two. The mic's there. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Just a very quick slight comment is I utterly disagree with Board Gosh's characterisation of renewable gas. I've done work on this. There's huge problems with biomethane, and the EPA pointed to the fact that there's huge danger of intensification of agriculture, more nitrogen pollution, more problems there. My question is, we committed to carbon budgets. And we haven't heard much talk in this session about intergenerational justice. This was our characterisation of intergenerational justice. We have to meet carbon budgets. We're massively missing the first one to end of 2025. We're definitely going to be missing the other one because we haven't invested significantly to do what's necessary. So the question is, how does business maintain its social licence when we are having a massive failure to meet our carbon budgets?
Okay, so I'm going to ask each of the panel, starting from Karen's side up to Bernadette, to give sort of their final comments, brief final comments, and to speak to whichever of those questions you'd like to speak to. And I think between the four of you, hopefully we'll get an answer for all of the questions. So Karen, I'll let you take it away first.
Yeah, I think just in terms of the short-termism and the employee kind of engagement and consultation piece, I would say, coming from a financial services background, actually any of us that hold a pension product, you can actually really make a massive difference in terms of voting with your investment strategy there and putting people under pressure. The other point is we all as consumers have decisions that we can make in terms of how we drive that demand and what products are actually delivered to us. So I think that, for me, that's really important. The speaking up in terms of the employee piece, that is challenging if an employer is sort of not really wanting to listen or go on that proper sustainability journey. That's challenging. And I think that's where the employee forums, where, having that employee representative on the board is really important, because you can actually feed that kind of discontent in terms of where the strategy of the company is going and in terms of being heard. So, for me, I think we all as individuals we have power. We do need bigger corporates to be making decisions, but I think as individuals we can make a change as well.
Thanks, Karen. Aoife.
Thanks. I think on the employee activism point, there's kind of two ways to look at it. Like, it certainly is a challenge, and there are examples globally where there's been kind of employee movements and employee activism that has driven change. But I think there's also a really interesting concept around the actually how can you use your skills to drive that change. So Project Drawdown have this brilliant resource where you can download all of your job descriptions that are typical in an organisation, like HR, recruitment, operations, and actually how could you layer climate activism or sustainability into your existing role. So I think that's an interesting point around kind of the skills. We know we need more skills. We need more people. We need more people to know what they're talking about. So I think there is a huge opportunity to try and look to work within your organisations where possible to be part of that change. And I think on the point around the short tenure of the CEOs, it's certainly a challenge, and it's not just, I suppose, semi-states that tend to have a typically short-term focus, but I think that's where that longer-term strategy planning is just going to be absolutely key, because it's locking in your capital expenditure, your business plans, your business models into a longer-term model that decouples growth from carbon intensity. I think that's going to be absolutely critical.
Great, thanks, Aoife. Sriteja.
So I want to comment on the employee activism, especially the new generations, and this is what I also see when I'm teaching my students in the classroom. They are much more aware of and much more conscious about climate change and sustainability issues around, and they are not really shying away from taking risk when it comes to what their companies, the companies they are or they want to work at, are approaching sustainability. Actually, a recent KPMG study found that in the UK, 45% of 18 to 24-year-olds really research the company's ESG activities even before they go to the interview. And 1 in 3 of them actually rejected or turned down job offers because the company's ESG values are not in line with what these 18 to 24-year-olds what they held as their values. I think the change is really happening if the businesses like it or not from the job market. There is definitely change happening from the consumer base, but that is what I'm really not very happy about either. Like I mentioned the example of fashion industry, right? Fashion industry contributes to 10% of global emissions. How many of us really still buy from those companies? Almost all of us. We know all the social and environmental issues surrounding Amazon. How many of us place orders from Amazon? Almost all of us, right? So unless changes are driven by governments, yes, and policies, but then consumers and the job market, businesses are not really going to change unless this external stimuli is applied. And we are starting to see that from the policy implications, from the job market, and from the consumer basis. So I think that's where the change is going to be driven from.
Great. And Bernadette, I'll let you have the last word.
Yes, time's up there.
Yes, time's very much up.
For me, in terms of all the sentiments expressed, was back to that stakeholder engagement model. And for the not having a social license to operate, not engaging your employees, to my mind, those businesses are dead businesses. They're not going to exist. They will go out of business. For me, that positive imagined future is a business ambition that has strategy, that weathers the test of tenure, but a strategy and fundamentally a culture and an ethos that actually, in terms of the products that they sell and make a commercial return on, but they've a balanced perspective across all the stakeholders. And that, the balance sheet of the future is completely redesigned from what we're looking at now. So I think for me, in terms of the negatively framed questions, it's those businesses are gone and should not exist, and that the new business models of the future balance some of the concerns that we try to articulate, I think, here today.
Does anyone want to comment on carbon budgets?
Apart from that, we're doing a very interesting piece of work with the school here in DCU, and it should be finished later during the summer, which I think will help, not possibly speak exactly to the issue that you raised, but will definitely keep the dialogue and the debate going and build understanding of how business relates to the carbon budgets. And for us, again, it's keeping these issues in the public domain and in a constructive, data-driven fashion where you can have a really good dialogue to keep actors engaged and hopefully move the dial that way.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernadette. Thank you so much to the audience for your excellent questions and discussion. Thank you so much to Bernadette, Sriteja, Aoife and Karen. And enjoy your coffee. I've kept you long enough. Thank you, everyone.